Hello everyone. This module deals with role and significance of communication skills. Before we go into the module, we need to know how communication developed from prehistoric times to modern communication. Research records say that communication started even before 30,000 BC. People of those days used to communicate through sounds, gestures, symbols, etc. It was researched that the communication first started by just miming the sounds of nature. At a later stage, paintings and drawings were developed. This is known as Paleolithic art, and this is the earliest art discovered. After that, a series of pictures were drawn to tell a story. Later, Sumerians started using most common ideas, which is known as pictographic writing, about 3500 BC. As pictographic writing had a limitation of writing new or unusual words, they started using sounds for each symbol instead of an object or idea. Slowly, the sounds were changed into words and paved a way to develop languages as per the convenience of the people in a particular locality. In the modern world, communication has gained much importance, and people could understand that communication is an important way to develop relationship with each other. So it was rightly said that one cannot not communicate.
Hello everyone, I am Geeta, and I welcome you all to this training course on communication skills. Welcome to this module on communication skills. Communication skills play an important role at the workplace. Communication happens through different modes and mediums, like telephone, mails, and so on. Generally speaking, communication requires at least two people, a sender and a receiver. Lack of clarity in communication results in misunderstanding and confusion. If these barriers are not tackled and removed in time, they can result in undesirable consequences. This module will help students and professionals identify barriers and problems in communication, deliver messages more accurately, improve interpersonal communications, attain better success professionally. Topic 1. Role and significance of communication skills.
Communication is an act of passing information. It can be verbal, nonverbal, written, or visual. But the only purpose of communication would be to convey correct thought and avoid miscommunication. More than words, communication also transfers messages through tone, quality of voice, eye contact, physical closeness, visual cues, and body language.
On completing this module, you should be able to identify the types of communication and the factors that influence it, differentiate between the various communication processes, identify the best possible means of communicating in different situations.
Communication is an act of passing information. It can be verbal, nonverbal, written, or visual. But the only purpose of communication would be to convey correct thought and avoid miscommunication. More than words, communication also transfers messages through tone, quality of voice, eye contact, physical closeness, visual cues, and body language.
One of the most important factors that distinguish human beings from animals is the ability to communicate. How effectively a person communicates further sets him apart from other individuals and plays a major role in determining his success.
Good communication skills are necessary to have a positive impact on the personal as well as the professional life of a person. Communication skills can promote more effective business practices and allow individuals outside and within the organization to feel comfortable working with each other. Communication builds a better relationship between family, friends, colleagues, etc. Miscommunication or ineffective communication results in unnecessary delays in operations and implementation of policies of the organization. Improper communication may also result in ambiguity among the people.
The very purpose of communication would fail if you cannot deliver your message to the intended person clearly. Communication failure can also occur if the message is clearly delivered, but the targeted person misinterprets it. This can result in confusion, waste of effort and time, and missed opportunities. Hence, the purpose of communication is served only when it is spoken, listened to, and grasped correctly. In today's competitive world, communication skills hold much more prominence, especially when recruiting employees. In an interview, most employers judge the candidates on the basis of their communication and confidence. Committing of mistakes on the part of the employee is not taken lightly by the company, and most mistakes are committed on account of misunderstandings and communication gap.
The advantages of good communication skills do not stop at one stage alone, but bear influence throughout an individual's life and career. Let's consider a scenario on how good communication skills can be advantageous in the long run.
Both Suhas and Jaideep are good contenders for the managerial post. I can't quite decide between the two.
No doubt, they have a good skill set of their own, but Suhas is a better communicator than Jaideep.
I agree. Suhas is good with clients and making deals. I personally find it difficult to follow what Jaideep tries to communicate. My vote would go for Suhas.
An employee with good communication skills tends to get promoted often, and these skills are considered a must for managerial levels. Despite the importance of effective communication, many individuals ignore to improvise on it and thereby struggle to communicate their thoughts and ideas clearly.
There are many types of communication skills, like intrapersonal communication skills, interpersonal communication skills, nonverbal communication skills, mass communication skills based on writing, etc. In this courseware, we will be focusing on interpersonal communication skills only.
Communication skills are largely categorized under intrapersonal and interpersonal. In intrapersonal communication, the individual communicates with his inner self or with the abstract universe or higher power through modes of reflection, contemplation, and meditation, whereas in interpersonal communication, a direct face-to-face communication or conversation takes place between two or more individuals. In this courseware, we will be focusing on interpersonal communication skills only.
Interpersonal communication is a process in which information is received or sent between two or more people. It is usually a direct or face-to-face interaction. Interpersonal communication includes many aspects of listening, persuading, asserting, nonverbal communication, etc. There are two types of interpersonal communication: verbal, nonverbal. Verbal communication. Verbal communication, as the name depicts, is communication through words. It includes both oral and written communication. Factors such as choice of words, language, sentence structure, timing, modulation of tone, etc., play a major role in verbal communication. Verbal communication avoids misunderstanding and helps the speaker to get an instant feedback. Nonverbal communication, on the other hand, involves communication without words. It is a process of communicating through body language, signs, symbols, gestures, facial expressions, etc. The receiver may interpret the nonverbal communication based on his understanding.
Interpersonal communication is divided into verbal and nonverbal communication. Verbal communication comprises of all forms of word usage, both oral as well as written. This form of communication is used to a great extent on a daily basis. On the other hand, nonverbal communication comprises of symbols and signs to convey meaning instead of actual words.
Source. Source is the sender of the message. He will have some idea about what he is trying to communicate. Encoding. The sender encodes the message or the idea through words, symbols, gestures, etc. Channel. Channel is the medium through which the sender sends the message. It is very important to avoid barriers in the channel, such as noise, etc., for effective communication. Decoding. Decoding is a process in which the receiver tries to understand the message given by the sender by interpreting it. Receiver. Receiver is the person to whom the message is sent. Feedback. Feedback is the message or gesture sent by the receiver in order to tell the sender that he understood the message. A communication is said to be incomplete if the sender doesn't get any feedback from the receiver.
For a message to be delivered effectively, the communication barriers or problems will have to be removed at the different stages of communication process. The different stages of the communication process where problems are likely to crop up is shown below. Source. The source, i.e., the sender of the message, has to be clear on what message is to be communicated, why it has to be communicated, and to whom it must be communicated. Message. Message is the information to be communicated. Encoding. Encoding is the process of transferring the information into a communicable form. This has to be done as clearly and simply as possible. Channel. Channel is the medium or mode through which the message is delivered. Decoding. Decoding is the process of breaking down the message and understanding it. Receiver. Receiver is the audience or the person to whom the message was intended. Feedback. Feedback is the response or reaction formulated by the receiver for the message delivered. This depends on the receiver's interpretation and perception of the message.
Before you start the communication, it is very important to plan your message, because planning helps you to be clear about the message you are going to transfer. This helps in reducing miscommunication or improper communication. Planning also helps in the interrupted flow of communication. While we plan our message, it is important to do the following: know your audience, know the purpose, plan your channel, note down the points of the message.
In the planning stage, the message to be conveyed is planned at the source. While planning, it is important to understand the objective to be met, know the audience, plan the message, plan the means of delivering the message, elicit suitable response, feedback.
Encoding is the process that takes place with the sender. In this process, the sender changes his thoughts, feelings, or emotions into a message in the way he likes to communicate. For example, let Mr. A be the sender. He just says, "Hey." This may have several ways to say. Mr. A may just want to say "hey" to his friend, or someone may be stealing Mr. A's bike and he wants to say "hey" to stop them, etc. Mr. A has to decide how he wants to say "hey," i.e., the tone, modulation, etc.
In the encoding stage, the sender has to decide how the message will be prepared or formulated such that the recipient perceives it correctly. While encoding, it is important to understand what really needs to be said. Think about the message's effect from the recipient's perspective. Choose words, gestures that help the recipient to understand better. Decide the elements or components of the message. Make sure the message is developed properly, free of mistakes and redundancy.
With the growing technology and invention of various channels of communication, the sender should decide which the possible best channel to send the message is. Selection of wrong channel may hamper the communication process. This may create a wrong impression and mistrust about the sender. It is important to keep in mind that it is always better to communicate through a channel in which the receiver prefers, because he will be the person who is going to understand the message. The sender should also keep in mind the barriers such as noise, etc., to make communication more effective.
In the channeling stage, the sender needs to choose the best possible channel of communication to send across the message. This depends on factors like time, opportunity, and complexity of the message. While channeling, it is important to determine the sensitivity and emotionality of the message subject. Determine the complexity of the message. Gauge the recipient's preferences. Look into the time constraints. Consider the availability of all channeling options. Determine the possible frequency of queries and responses.
As discussed before, opting for a particular channel of communication depends on a variety of factors. Let's consider a scenario in which an employee has to be asked to improve her work.
Oh dear, the entire report will have to be rewritten. It has way too many problems. Jenny has to do better than this. It's time I have a one-on-one talk with her.
Jenny here.
Hi Jenny, this is Sheila. Can you please come to my cabin? We need to discuss a few things.
Sure, Sheila. I'll be there in a moment.
As a manager, Sheila did the right thing by politely asking Jenny to come to her cabin instead of sending a lengthy, reproachful mail condemning her and her work. In such situations, a face-to-face discussion resolves many problems and enables both the parties to analyze the issue better.
Decoding is the first step in which the receiver is involved. When the receiver receives the information, he first interprets it to understand what the sender has told him. This understanding depends upon the culture he/she was brought up and the understanding ability of the receiver. To decode the message, the receiver should be active enough and try to interpret the message to his/her best.
In the decoding stage, the delivered message is received and interpreted by the recipient. This involves active listening and undivided attention on the part of the recipient. While decoding, it is important to maintain eye contact with the person delivering the message. Observe the body language of the other person. Carefully read and analyze the message. Try not to get distracted. Display appropriate signs of listening.
Feedback is the response given by the receiver to the message given by the sender. Communication process is said to be complete only if the feedback is received by the sender. Without feedback, communication becomes meaningless. Feedback is important because it completes the communication process. It makes the sender know if his message has been received by the receiver. It can measure the effectiveness of communication. It makes the process of communication continuous. Feedback is very important to make the process of communication successful. Let's consider a scenario where there is no feedback. If a manager speaks about the production and quality of work of an employee, and the employee doesn't respond, the manager will get frustrated. The employee may have the option to accept or refuse the idea of the manager, but he will have to communicate it back to him, which is called as feedback.
In the feedback stage, a response to the message is obtained from the responder. This is important to determine if the message was delivered and interpreted correctly, along with the recipient's views on the same. While receiving feedback, it is important to gauge the confidence levels of the respondent, watch for defensiveness, look for agreement, ascertain if the message has been understood, identify their interest levels, identify if they are being honest or otherwise. Important note for respondent: respond, do not react.
As we have come to the end of the session, let us recall the key points of the module. Communication is an act of passing information. Communication skills are necessary in every walk of life. Communication builds a better relationship between family, friends, colleagues, etc. Improper communication may also result in ambiguity among the people. Communication skills are classified into many types. Interpersonal communication is a process in which information is received or sent between two or more people. Factors such as choice of words, language, sentence structure, timing, modulations of tone, etc. play a major role in verbal communication. Nonverbal communication is a process of communicating through body language, signs, symbols, gestures, facial expressions, etc. Planning helps in reducing miscommunication or improper communication. Encoding is a process in which the sender changes his thoughts, feelings, or emotions into a message in the way he likes to communicate. Selection of wrong channel may hamper the communication process. When the receiver receives the information, he first interprets it to understand what the sender has told him. Receiver is the person who receives the message sent by the sender. Feedback is the response given by the receiver to the message given by the sender.
With this, we come to the end of the topic on role and significance of communication skills. Let us recall the key points of this topic. Communication skills are the ability to use language and express information which are essential for success in one's life and career. Communication skills are largely categorized under intrapersonal and interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is divided into verbal and nonverbal communication. Verbal communication can be either oral or written, which makes use of words. Nonverbal communication encompasses signs, symbols, and nonverbal expressions. For effective communication, barriers have to be removed from the communication process at various stages.